Hello there, I'm Adam Forbes. I'm the author of Corporate Escapology and the host of the Corporate Escapology podcast. Today, I'm talking to Erica Doremo, who is a champion of the underserved. She has a consultancy and coaching business called Two Piers, which helps companies and individuals within those companies deal with some of the challenges of being underrepresented, both from the individual perspective and also from the company to change culture. And she knows an awful lot about challenging work environments. She spent a lot of time working on the North Slope in Alaska, and then offshore in Angola, as well as working in mergers and acquisitions. So really high pressured environments. And she's got a fair share of stories about working in some of those environments. And she brings all of that experience to bear in her coaching and consultancy. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think you're going to learn an awful lot about how somebody can take their lived experience that they've gained from working in a corporate and turn it into a business with some of the skills and experiences that they've also learned along the way. Hey, Erica, thanks so much for joining us today on the Corporate Escapology podcast.
Hi, Adam. It's really great to be here.
Thanks. Well, I'm really keen that we share your story with some of the listeners because it's a fascinating one with all sorts of experience beforehand. You had a great experience and career in BP before, but now you're no longer working there, so you're doing something quite different, and I want everybody to hear about it. So please, let's start at the beginning. Why did you join a corporate rather than do some other kind of a career entry?
Yeah. Well, so I guess, I started out as an engineer, right? So I am a rule follower type of gal. Like, tell me the procedure and I will follow it. Give me the ladder and that's what I'll climb. Like, I love a process. And so growing up, like, we didn't have a lot of financial stability, actually. And my mother always said, you should be an engineer. You should be an engineer. And I was like, Mom, I want to be a writer. No, I'm going to be a writer. She was like, you'll never make money being a writer. You should be an engineer. And I was like, that sounds really boring. I don't want to be an engineer. But then I fell in love with physics. And I went and said to my high school physics teacher, like, I'm going to go into physics. I love this stuff. And he was like, you're either going to end up in a lab or you're going to end up teaching like I do. I don't think either of those really suits your personality. Like, you seem more problem solving. Why don't you look into engineering? So that was kind of it. Like, once I was on that mechanical engineering path, I paid my way through university in the US. That's like not an easy task to do. And so I was sort of like locked in at that point. And in mechanical engineering, certainly I'm sure some people come out and they start their own ventures as like even if you wanted to become a professional engineer, you would still need to work under another professional engineer. So that major sort of put me on track to work for a large corporation. I was looking at like defense contractors or companies that build airplanes. And then BP came along and I actually interned for them. So I started interning for them when I was about 20. And spent the next 2 decades with them as my employer. So that they got me early, and that was kind of all I knew. And again, you tell me what the path is. It's like graduate from high school, okay, check. Graduate from college, check. Get the job, check. Get on the path, right? Just get on that path, and then do what they tell you to do, and you'll get the reward that they tell you that you'll get. And so that's kind of how I ended up on that career path. And it wasn't in, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it was something to do with, you'd got the education, but you now needed to apply that education. And so you had to work for quite a big company to get those opportunities to apply it.
Yeah. And I had 6 figures worth of, college tuition debt hanging over my head that became due in 6 months, so I was one of the lucky ones that, because I'd had an internship and I had already established a relationship with a company, I had an offer my senior year. So I was able to go through my senior year. I mean, I think I had like a 4.0 GPA because I was so stress-free because I actually had something lined up. Like, I remember sitting in the computer lab because we didn't have our own computers at the time, getting the email from BP with an offer and crying because I never thought I would like break out of that socioeconomic class. Like, I never thought I would be able to pay my bills. That was just something that was astounding to me. Whereas a lot of my classmates, like my boyfriend at the time, was graduated honors in electrical engineering, and he couldn't find anything. So it was a tough time in the market. I think it was like the mid-aughts, and there were a lot of people who were struggling to find roles, and I was just so grateful that I got a role. I knew I would be able to pay my bills, start paying my debt back, maybe start saving money.
Wow. Yeah, big shift there. And so how long did you you began as an engineer? How long did you stay as an engineer? Did you practice as an engineer throughout your whole career?
Great question. So I did graduate with that shiny engineering degree and went to do engineering roles, and quickly realized that, like, in mechanical engineering, they teach you about compressors and turbines, or turbines, as the words say. And there are all these like diagrams, like a trapezoid on its side or like a circle with some lines on it. I never really learned about real engineering. And it turns out that going into actual engineering, you're dealing with actual equipment. And what you learned in school is like mildly valuable, but most of it is just problem solving on your feet, dealing with people, dealing with project management. Even as a very young engineer at 22, 23, I was doing, pipeline installations and stuff. By 25, I was a startup engineer for the SCP pipeline that goes from the Caspian to Europe and brings gas. But I was like the startup engineer. So the person trying to make sure that gas came from the Caspian to Europe. Many governments were worried about this, right? And so I would say that in BP, like, I definitely hit the ground running. It gave me so much opportunity to step into some really big roles. I wore many hats. So even when I was an engineer, I was kind of doing other things too, right? Obviously the project management piece, the people interface piece. And then I ended up somehow finding my way into finance, and did performance management, really, but it was under an umbrella of finance. So I did a lot of performance management and like strategy, risk management, and that gave me access to some very senior levels of leadership and some very big picture thinking, which has continued to pay dividends throughout my career now, even in this second phase of my career. And then I kind of, dabbled around different things, did more field roles, ended up in leadership. And by the end, I was doing mergers and acquisitions. So kind of non-linear, I would say.
No, very much non-linear. And also just the sense of scale quite early on in your career too, to be,
billions.
People talk a lot about how startup life is, really exciting. You get to do loads of different things, but the scale is really missing. You're working at this kind of really small level where you, 23, 25, really big projects, international projects. I mean, these sort of opportunities that you kind of read in the graduate, marketing material, but you don't really believe it is possible for somebody your age, but you did it.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember them saying something like, hey, if we don't hit this deadline, then the country of Georgia will go to Iran for gas. And the president of the United States really doesn't want that to happen. So we have to hit our deadline, right? Like, what? No pressure, whatever. It's fine. It's all fine.
So what was drawing you, do you think, to go a bit more commercial than from that engineering background? Because, BP is a big engineering company. I mean, it's proud of its engineering capabilities, and it obviously really, really needs and vital to the company's success. But what was sort of drawing you away from that at the time?
I wouldn't actually say in BP that I was drawn away from the technical. In that I brought the technical where I went. So I really brought, you can take the gal out of engineering, you can never take the engineer out of the gal. So even when I went in those finance roles, I was there as the technical person with my technical hat, but it was great for exposure and for me to build my financial and business acumen and to see how things are happening, like behind the scenes or above the clouds, so to speak. And then really what ended up happening was by 2016, I was working offshore in Angola. And I just, at that point, I had been working my entire career to try to drive some change around how we supported underrepresented individuals in the workplace, particularly from my perspective, women, right? I was usually the only woman at site, wherever that was. I was usually the only woman, even in some of the finance and risk conversations, women were sparse on the ground. And we talked a big talk about supporting women. But, when you're out there and you're the only woman on a facility or platform in the middle of the ocean, that's it, right? Like you have kind of a satellite connection to shore to talk to somebody if you really need to. But even then, it doesn't always work. And you're just very isolated, not a lot of support structure, and not a lot of sort of cultural awareness around going into a space that looks nothing like the way you were raised socially, both from a gender perspective and from kind of just a work environment perspective. So, when I worked in Azerbaijan or Angola, you get a cultural immersion where they sort of bring you up to speed. Like this is considered rude, and this is how, things work here. Just a heads up, right? But we don't really give anybody that heads up when we stick them in a work environment where they don't look like anybody else and they don't understand the cultural norms. So all that to say that by 2016, I was really, really adamant that I wanted to do something in that space and support other people that looked like that whose experience looked like that. Even my Angolan colleagues who, we were nationalizing the workforce, I think they came up against some of the same struggles with feeling like they didn't fit in, or, the ways that their leadership style were being measured didn't match the culture and the value systems that they brought to the table. And so by 2016, I said, okay, fine, I'm going to create this. I kind of reached a breaking point as far as working offshore in some of these more extreme environments. I needed a break. I decided I wanted to go back to school. I was very, very lucky to actually get a sabbatical to start my current entity, Two Piers. I was able to start Two Piers in order to provide support and resources to people, workshops, kind of mentoring, coaching, etc. And then I also went and got my executive MBA at the time because I thought, well, shoot, I've always had an accounting department. I've always had a marketing department. I've always had a legal department. I've never had to do this myself. I've been one tiny little slice in the pie. So for me, I got an MBA to maybe even just prove to myself that I had more business acumen than I realized.
How did BP support you through that? You didn't actually leave, so you took a sabbatical. So how did that work? Financially, in terms of coming back to the job?
Yeah. Well, if I'm candid, I think that if I had asked for a sabbatical, that would not have been on the table. But what happened was I reached a point where it wasn't even about that. I was ready to leave. I was ready to quit, actually. The environment had been pretty tough. Not because of Angola or the Angolans, just it was tough being the only American woman on that vessel in most cases. And so I had some support from senior leadership who were checking to make sure that the women in the company were doing okay. And they, checked in on me and said, how's it going? Are you ready for the next adventure? The next move in your career path in BP? And I said, nope, I'm actually done. I'm sorry. I'm going to quit. And I think because I was so certain about it, it was there was no negotiate. It wasn't really about me trying to negotiate at that point. I knew that this was unsustainable for me. And I really was I have this very vivid memory of strapping into a helicopter seat and being okay, there've been a bunch of helicopter crashes lately. If this helicopter goes down, have I done everything I want to do in this life? And the answer was no for the first time that I could remember, and I thought, shoot, I really don't want to die with regrets. It was just so vivid at that moment. I really don't want to die having not done this thing that I've wanted to do for so long. So, that was like a bright line for me. And I just said, I'm doing it. And when I said that, they were like, well, what can we do? Like, that what a shame to just completely, lose you after we've developed you for all these years. What can we do? Do you want a different job? Do you want us to pay for the MBA? Because I said I really want to go and focus on my own development, not for some other entity, but for me, so I can grow in ways that I want to grow that support my future. And in the end, they were like, well, could we just do a sabbatical? And perhaps if we just do a sabbatical, you won't get paid during that sabbatical, but at least you're on the books. You'll retain your years of service. And if you want to come back, we can't guarantee that there'll be a position for you, but at least it's easier to come back. So they kind of put a year deadline on that. But in the meantime, I had the opportunity to work on a study called Spot the Difference, which looked at the career choices and motivations of men and women. And that was funded by BP. It was a BP sponsored project. So I was essentially seconded into that and worked part-time. So
alongside your MBA?
Alongside my MBA, alongside starting up Two Piers, and alongside getting my yoga teacher certification, getting married, going on my honeymoon, I did all the things in that 1 year. I took a year out.
Just in case there's a helicopter crash coming up, you can take everything off. Did you go?
You gotta get done. And by the time I finished my executive MBA, I was ready for a role in M&A, and that became available, and that had been something I'd always been intrigued by, and I knew I probably wouldn't get that opportunity outside of BP because I didn't have a lot of commercial background. I had some finance, but not a lot of commercial. So I jumped on that opportunity, and I have no regrets about it. Like those few years that I came back and spent at BP, I was actually quite happy. I've really enjoyed my time in M&A. I really enjoyed my team. I loved the projects that I was working on. It was fascinating. And so when the opportunity came in 2020 for voluntary severance packages, I was really torn because I was happy,
Yeah. So before we go on to that part, which is really interesting to hear about the choice and the thinking that you were going through, I just think it's a moment just to sort of reflect on the variety of skills and experiences that you get. It's on offer in a corporate. To go from an engineer through into the sort of technology, so to be offshore, to be at the North Slope in Alaska, and to then end up in M&A. I mean, the chances that people are taking on you because you're proving your worth and you're proving that you can grow into opportunities are just like nothing else. You could never, as you said, ever have applied for probably half of those jobs that you went to eventually, but because people knew you and trusted you and you had connections and a track record, you got these amazing opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that there's more to do than time or capacity to do it in any one of those large companies. So I think anytime you raise your hand and you're like, hey, I have an idea for how we can manage this risk management process or something. So often people will be like, okay, cool, put something together, put it in front of me. And if you do a good job at that, it's like, all right, good, run with it then, please, because we need somebody to just take it. There's enough little vacuums in those companies where you can find your space, find something that really appeals to you that you have some skill at, and run with it,
Yeah, amazing. Great. But it stopped being amazing enough for you because when the voluntary severance came around, you thought, yes, this is my time. So what was that had changed?
Well, there were spreadsheets involved. I'll say that because, again, I will always be a spreadsheet gal. I joke, but my risk management background 100% informed my decision to take that severance package because I knew that there is always more than one dimension to risk, right? And anytime you're looking at risk from an enterprise perspective, you're looking at not just the health and safety risk. I mean, you're looking at the health risk, the safety risk, the environmental risk, the reputational risk, the financial risk. There's all of these measures of risk that you're looking at. for any potential scenario or outcome, or I should say impacts. And so when I was looking at staying or leaving, I put that decision through a variety of different lenses and not just the financial risk lens. To me, the financial risk lens needed to be accounted for. It needed to be mitigated. But that was not actually the top risk that I was mitigating for. It wasn't the most likely scenario that I would end up destitute, and it wasn't the highest impact to me, because I can always get money back. You can always regrow money. You cannot regrow time. And so living an unfulfilled life or having major regrets was a big motivator for me when I looked at that. And at that point, I might have been happy right then, but if I fast forwarded 5 years and thought of myself like, where am I going to be in 5 years? Commercial manager role, perhaps. Those M&A roles are intense and they burn people out, which is why, you really only plan especially for the type of role that I was in, you only plan for a short-term role there. And then you got to go. They make room for new people, which is great and smart. But the opportunities that I would be looking at 5 years down, they would have prestige. They would probably have good pay, but those were not the boxes I was trying to tick in terms of the life I wanted. I wanted something that was really fulfilling, that felt impactful, where I could decide how and when I spent my time and energy. And that wasn't going to happen in the entity that I was in.
So you had an advantage over maybe some people who just at that moment of a restructure think, what should I do? You started building Two Piers. So tell us a bit about Two Piers and where was that in your decision making? How did that feature in your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I started Two Piers, again, it was back in 2016, and at the time, and having understood markets and what customers want, you might find this funny, but at the time I felt there was just a big gaping need that I had that wasn't being met. And if I couldn't find anyone to meet it, like I just wanted some coaching for somebody that was not C-suite, and everything out there for women that was, coaching or professional development specific to gender was all about C-suite women. I thought, come on, like what about just first-time leaders who are struggling? I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find any practical resources for how to handle some of these environments, how to handle these interactions. And so I just created what I wished there was out there. I never actually wanted to be a business owner myself. If I could have just worked for somebody who was doing this and made it happen, that would have been great. Like I love to be the brains behind it, but I never had a desire to kind of learn how to, do bookkeeping. And there is, an element of all of that for small business. So I sort of did it despite not really wanting to be a business owner, but I felt so strongly that this needed to exist. And it really wasn't taking into account a big picture. It was like, let's just do some workshops, provide this as a stopgap, like just stop the bleeding, right? Put a bandage on stuff and get people some resources quickly. And then over time, I became pretty uncomfortable with just trying to fix individuals so that they could conform to these environments. Like it's a short-term measure so that people can survive, but ideally we should be fixing the environments. So that's how it expanded a little bit. And then by the time 2020 came around and the severance package was on the table, I understood that if I was going to grow this in any way that was strategic, that I could not really do it in my time, my free time. It would take second seat to whatever major project was on my plate. It really had to take a back burner, especially while I was in M&A. There just wasn't time. You're already working like a 60-hour week. So, yeah.
And what were you offering at the time? It was workshops then that you were, which are, that's, you can't just fit that into a regular job either, can you? And a client needs something. Coaching may be a bit different, but what sort of services were you offering that you were able to offer whilst you were effectively testing this business?
Yeah, so I did do open enrollment workshops. They were usually scheduled on weekends.
Weekends,
And
okay.
those were sort of open to anyone who wanted to register, so we would spread the word. The tough part is getting the word out is hard and it takes work. And that's the stuff that needs to be done on like a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. And then the coaching, you're right, that could be pretty flexible. Going to conferences or organizations and facilitating workshops, that was another big part. And that was actually great, because once you get in front of the group of people, you're delivering value. You have access to all these other people who might come from different walks of life, different areas that have converged for a conference. And then, I usually ended up meeting new people who would become coaching clients or who would put me in touch with other organizations or universities.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about Two Piers and what you're doing now then. So you've now taken the business full-time. You're working on it full-time. You're doing other things too. Yeah, full-time. So what are you doing? What's different?
So yeah, what am I doing and what's different? Well, generally what we're offering, I mean, I kind of mentioned a lot of workshops, a lot of programming, a lot of coaching. So what I was doing before that I thought was coaching was probably more like mentoring or consulting. After BP, I was able to go get my coaching certification. So International Coaching Federation, got my credential, really, really had to go deep personally to do the work to really understand coaching. That's been pretty life-changing for me. I really feel like coaching is my calling in some ways. So even in a consulting setting, all of those elements of coaching come in, and it informs everything I do, whether it's workshops, coaching, consulting, everything. That curiosity, problem solving, open-ended, just embracing the different paths and life experiences that people bring to the table and being very forward-focused, goal-oriented. So that was one of the big changes in 2020, kind of pursuing that. I probably wouldn't have been able to pursue it while doing a full-time job like that. Like I was really able to give it my all. I was able to accumulate my hours quick enough and get the certification. So that has been a big piece of development for me. Yeah.
And you've chosen to really specialize in that diversity, equity, inclusion space. So that conscious decision to not be an executive coach or not even just be a sort of female leader coach, but really focus hard on people that are struggling with those challenges.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned that, because this is the joy of being a business owner and seeing things evolve in your business and reading the room, right? And understanding that what you thought was your audience maybe isn't your audience. So yeah, my message has always been targeted towards people who were underrepresented and who were the trailblazers and the change makers, right? The first one to blaze that trail, and the person who doesn't have anyone necessarily supporting them, cheering them on, doesn't have anyone that looks like them as an example. What I'm finding though is that a lot of my clients are actually straight white men who are in leadership positions in terms of coaching, and I want to empower their teams. And so a lot of the change is that, this aligns with my mission in that these are the people who hold the power right now. We can still enact change that way. So I'm here for the folks who need the extra support, and I have that same lived experience and can speak to that and can hold space for them, empathy. I always ask clients, like, what was it about me that resonated? And it's usually the engineering background, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's because it's differentiated, because there are a lot of women that are talking about this stuff but maybe haven't gone through that experience, and that like directly. And one of the things that I'm just so interested in with corporate escapology is the idea of these experiences that we've had, how we can package those up, the skills that we develop, all those sorts of the knowledge that we acquire, how we package this up and how we can use it afterwards. And we quite often think about some of the more technical skills as the things that we're going to use to package up. but actually it's the experience here for you. You've actually been offshore working like this, seen what it's really like. That gives you enormous credibility. It means that you can talk to other industries, but it's so extreme that it means you can talk to everybody, because it's sort of evocative, the idea of the loneliness being out in offshore Angola and having to deal with these sorts of situations. So it's just fascinating to me how you've taken an experience plus the technical skills, I know, and the experience and the coaching and all of those things. But really, this lived experience is what you're using to form the basis of your credibility, which supports your business.
Yeah. I also think that there's a piece to, I don't do engineering in coaching, in coaching sessions, but there is a piece of that like logical brain that comes with it, that in the DEI space, and because these things are so tied up in what is ethically right and morally right in some cases, and we're really looking at like inequity and some, a lot of like just unfairness, tragedy, all these like emotive things. And it can be a tough space to navigate, but also there's this like myth that it's all the mushy stuff, right? And it's not the mushy stuff. It's very much around logical problem solving, looking at root causes, looking at your talent pipeline and debottlenecking your talent pipeline, like taking out all the filters of your talent pipeline. So I still bring that engineer approach to it. And
the language too, that means you connect with these people. You're not
debottlenecking
theory, debottlenecking being the obvious. But that, I think the theory can actually put a lot of people off things like this, because it feels a bit too academic. It feels like it's a little bit out of touch. It won't work in my environment, but you kind of prove that it can work in their environment, because you've been in this really extreme environment and seen it and seen how change can happen. So tell me, how is it now? How is it feeling now to be a business owner, to be making your money or living out of something by yourself, rather than being, waiting for a salary and a paycheck coming in?
It never becomes unscary to me, but it feels so much more empowered now, because all of those little things that you start out and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to learn how to do contracts. Oh my gosh, I got to learn how to do, again, bookkeeping. Like, we do not underestimate the value of understanding bookkeeping. Debits and credits, man. Just watch a YouTube video is really valuable. And so these things, though, it feels overwhelming at first, right? But now looking back over the span of years, at first I had all that outsourced, right? Like when you start out and I had money from BP coming in and I just was doing this off the side on my free time, I could afford to lose money on it. I could afford to pay people to handle the bookkeeping, the advertising, all that kind of stuff. And then as you go, you start to realize like, oh, I could probably do this better myself. Like, I need to know the numbers in and out anyways. I need to understand where things are happening, how they're happening. I need to understand the tone of the company, everything. And so you start moving more of that stuff onto your own plate as you become more effective at it, more efficient. And I sometimes wake up and realize, like, Erica, all these skills you've now taught yourself and gained that you don't really give yourself credit for, because it's kind of like just normal business operations. But on any given day, you're wearing the strategy hat, the marketing hat, the accounting hat, the lawyer hat. Like, obviously I have an attorney that helps me, but I still have to like have that viewpoint on everything. So yeah, it feels very empowering now. I feel like I have a whole new set of skills that I could bring back should I go back to corporate one day.
That's fascinating. And how do you feel confidence-wise because of that, do you think?
I mean, definitely more resilient, right? It's always a bit, it's always going to be scary until you do it, until you go through the turmoil of it. And I have, right? Like I've had to like redo my books because folks made mistakes on it. I've had to like go undo mistakes that other people have done and lived through it, survived it. And that's really how you build resilience, right? Like that's the science shows. You can't just do it academically. Like, you have to make the mistakes. You have to go through the challenges in order to see that you'll be okay. You'll be fine. You'll figure it out. And that's probably, I think I've always sort of had that, like, I'll figure it out mindset. Probably why I was willing to take roles in remote countries, remote to me, and just jump in. This has just been that on a macro scale without anybody else around. So yeah, it feels very empowering. And, you know, like, I get to set my alarm whenever I want. I get to decide how I spend my time. I can block off a day for deep work. I can block off a day for hiking. These are the things that really, really matter to me because, again, I don't want to have another moment where I'm like, what if I die today and I didn't do what I wanted to do? I'm living my life to not have those moments.
So my last question then is, so yeah, those were the helicopter moment and the moment when you got the severance package and you projected forwards. Do you do that still? And what do you think?
I mean, that's a great question. I've never been a big long-term plan kind of gal, to be honest. Even in BP, I used to get that feedback all the time. And that's why I have such a nonlinear path, because people say, well, where do you know, at what point do you want to be a vice president? Like, what is your, it's like, I don't want to be a vice president. Like, why would I want to be a vice president? I was always about taking whatever was most interesting to me at the time and just pursuing that and going for it, even if it didn't match up with a long-term goal. And so in some ways, I would say this venture has been similar in that I kind of take it to the extent I can see into the future. You know, we can see a little bit, we can predict a little bit, but I'm sort of, again, being reaffirmed that there's not a lot of point for me to make these big long-term plans because everything changes. The bigger piece is being agile enough to change as I get new information and adjust and keep the core guiding principles at the top. And that is, again, maintain my independence, make sure I'm having impact, and live a life that feels aligned with my values. And so that's what I'm doing. It's certainly now we're sort of at this point where we're re-strategizing, and I'm kind of getting really clear on how we can make that impact based on the few years since 2020 where it's been full time. And yeah, we'll take a turn. We'll do that for a while and see how it goes and then adjust as needed.
Lovely. That's a great point to end. So thanks so much, Erica. I think you've got a very inspiring journey there of both what you managed to do during the time there, but also that break and then coming back. And then, of course, leaving and building your business up. And wish you really lots and lots of luck with that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate it.
Bye now.